Welcome back to Velsheen Rule. After serving 17 years in prison, the man commonly known as the American Taliban is now free. John Walker Lindh was caught while fighting with the Taliban 2 months after the 9/11 attacks. He was released earlier today, 3 years early from a prison in Indiana. And officials are concerned that he is still an extremist.
There's reason to be concerned about that. In newly released letters to NBC, Lindh said ISIS is, quote, doing a spectacular job. That was back in 2015. He also declared in 2014, quote, I feel honored to have been able to take part in the Afghan jihad. Now, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo wants a review of Lindh's release.
Unexplainable and unconscionable. I think it recalls a review of our processes, all the things that went into this day where he's being allowed out early. I think we need to review it all.
Joining us now, NBC's Ken Dilanian. Ken, a U.S. intel memo says he continued to advocate global jihad while he was in prison. He had a 20-year sentence. What in the world is he doing getting out 3 years early?
Well, he got credit for good behavior, Stephanie, and that's not discretionary. That's mandatory under the law. So it's not even accurate to say he was released early. Everybody who qualifies gets it, but apparently espousing extremist views does not qualify as bad behavior. So here we are. He's out.
Because the behavior is the following of the rule in prison?
Exactly. So not getting infractions, following the rules, doing what you're told. Nothing to do, apparently, with praising ISIS.
We know that he sent that one letter. What more do we know about what he said in terms of praising ISIS or other threatening language surrounding intent?
You mentioned that 2016 intelligence report, which had been previously reported, saying he was espousing global jihad. NBC News learned there was a more current memo circulating just this week that said, look, this guy's a committed jihadi, but we don't have to take the word of intelligence agencies because we have letters from Lindh that were sent to the NBC station in Los Angeles in which he was asked point blank, this is 2015, does ISIS represent Islam? And he said yes, and they're doing a fantastic job. And this, by the way, was after ISIS beheaded Americans on video, systematically raped Yazidi women, burned prisoners, and he said that ISIS establishing a caliphate in Iraq and Syria was a good thing. And so what's interesting about this is a lot of people remember that he expressed remorse at his sentencing in 2002, and there was this sort of ethos that somehow he had been victimized and he was a misguided young man who maybe was caught up in a post-9/11 anger wave. Apparently, that's not true because the letters that we have show that he has no remorse for fighting with the Taliban in Afghanistan, and he supports extremism to this day.
So here's the issue. Legally, he can get out early because he followed the rules and didn't do bad things in prison. This guy has espoused a view that most people would think is not in keeping with walking around in society. Are there any measures being taken to ensure he's not a danger to society? It's clear that, well, we don't know if it's clear, but as of 2014 or 15, there's no rehabilitation involved in his imprisonment.
Great point, Ali. So the judge has imposed unusually strict conditions on his supervised release. His internet will be monitored. He won't be allowed to travel abroad. And we're also told the FBI can be expected to keep a close eye on him. Now, whether they can get a warrant to surveil his communications is another matter. But what this case underscores is a larger problem, which is that the U.S. really doesn't have a de-radicalization program in its prisons the way, say, Saudi Arabia does. And there are more than 100 terrorism offenders who are due to be released over the next 2 to 3 years. And some people in Congress and elsewhere are wondering what we're doing about this. Why don't we have any programs to try to get to these people before we reach the day where they walk out of prison?
All right, Ken, thanks very much for your reporting on this. Ken Dilanian.
You bet.
It is complicated. What if he is in prison and behaving, brushing his teeth, going to bed, whatever all the day-to-day
prison's not there
rules,
to change your views.
And has really dangerous views? Where do you put that?
But we also don't jail people for their dangerous views. We jail people for acting on their dangerous views, which he did, and then he did his jail term. This is interesting. You're right. 20 years after 9/11, this stuff's going to start to matter.
Yes, and what happens if he leaves prison and then acts on these views? We're going to go after our lawmakers and say, how could you have released him?
Yeah,
this is complicated stuff.
It is. Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.